Why 52 sacred texts were banned from the Bible. The Nag Hammadi Library Uncensored. Picture this. Hidden beneath the scorching sands of Egypt, buried for over 16 centuries, lay secrets so explosive they could shatter everything you thought you knew about spirituality, creation, and your place in the universe. What if I told you that ancient texts deliberately concealed from the world reveal that the reality you see around you might be nothing more than an elaborate illusion? And what if the key to breaking free has been within you all along? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything. The discovery that shook the foundations when desert sands revealed heaven's secrets, December 1945. The remote Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi, a local farmer, digging for fertilizer in the arid soil near limestone cliffs, struck something unusual: a large sealed jar made of clay. What happened next would ignite one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries in human history. Inside that ancient vessel, wrapped carefully in protective materials, were 30 leather-bound books. But these weren't ordinary texts. They were codices containing over 50 different writings, penned in Coptic, an ancient Egyptian language, and hidden away nearly 1,600 years earlier. Among them were gospels, mystical and philosophical texts that had vanished from human knowledge, believed destroyed during the early days of institutional Christianity. What made this discovery so revolutionary? These manuscripts presented a version of spirituality that stood in stark contrast to everything the established church had taught for centuries. They spoke of secret knowledge, inner awakening, and a cosmos far more complex than the simple good versus evil narrative we'd been handed. Meanwhile, just 2 years earlier, in 1947, another earth-shattering find had emerged from the caves near the Dead Sea. A young Bedouin shepherd, searching for a lost goat, tossed a stone into a cave and heard the unmistakable sound of pottery shattering. What he stumbled upon were the Dead Sea Scrolls, nearly 900 ancient manuscripts that would forever alter our understanding of Judaism and early Christianity. These two discoveries, separated by mere miles and years, together painted a picture of ancient spirituality that was vastly more diverse, mystical, and questioning than what survived through official channels. The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed the Essenes, a devout Jewish sect living in desert communities, practicing ritual purification, sharing possessions, and awaiting not one but two messiahs. Their writings spoke of cosmic battles between light and darkness, of spiritual warriors preparing for the end times, and of direct communion with the divine. But it was the Nag Hammadi manuscripts that truly pulled back the curtain on suppressed wisdom. These texts belonged to the Gnostic spiritual seekers who believed that salvation came not from blind faith or external rituals, but from Gnosis, direct, experiential knowledge of divine truth. The word Gnosis translates to knowledge, but this isn't mere intellectual understanding. It's a profound, spiritual awakening, a sudden, transformative realization of reality's true nature and your authentic essence. For the Gnostics, the material world wasn't God's perfect creation, but a flawed copy, a prison designed to keep divine souls trapped in ignorance. Consider the explosive implications. If these texts were genuine and scholars confirmed they dated back to the early centuries of Christianity, then the spiritual landscape of that era was far more complex than we've been led to believe. Multiple competing visions of Jesus coexisted. Some saw him as a divine savior. Others viewed him as an enlightened master revealing secret teachings. Some communities practiced elaborate rituals. Others sought wisdom through silent meditation and introspection. The Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi included works like the Gospel of Thomas, containing 114 mysterious sayings attributed to Jesus, stripped of miracle stories and focused purely on esoteric wisdom. There was the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, and the Secret Book of John H., offering radically different perspectives on creation, divinity, and human purpose. Why were these texts buried? The answer lies in power and control. By the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine. To unify this sprawling empire, religious diversity had to be crushed. Beliefs needed standardization. Alternative interpretations became threats. Church councils convened to determine which texts were inspired by God and which were heretical. Books that empowered individuals to seek direct spiritual experience without priests, without intermediaries, without institutional control were dangerous. They undermined the very foundation of ecclesiastical authority, so these texts were banned. their followers persecuted, their teachings erased from acceptable discourse. But some believers, unwilling to watch sacred wisdom disappear forever, carefully preserved their most precious manuscripts in sealed jars and hid them in caves, perhaps hoping future generations might rediscover what had been stolen from humanity. And when those jars were opened in 1945, something remarkable happened, though the full significance wouldn't be understood for decades. Initially, a small group of scholars, many with ties to the Catholic Church, controlled access to these men. For over 40 years, the vast majority remained locked away, supposedly due to the complexity of translation and restoration. But critics suspected something more sinister: deliberate suppression. What if these texts contained revelations that could undermine core Christian doctrines? What if they proved that many supposedly unique Christian concepts, baptism, communal meals, messianic expectations, cosmic dualism, had existed in Jewish mystical communities before Jesus? When the manuscripts finally became publicly available in 1991, the floodgates opened. Scholars around the world began piecing together a picture of early spirituality that was richer, stranger, and more mystical than anyone imagined. These weren't just historical curiosities. They were windows into suppressed dimensions of human spiritual seeking. The question became unavoidable: what else has been hidden from us? If these texts could remain secret for 16 centuries, what other truths have been carefully edited out of our spiritual heritage? And perhaps most importantly, why? The answers emerging from these ancient pages suggest something profound and unsettling. The version of spirituality we've inherited, with its emphasis on obedience, original sin, external salvation, and institutional authority, may be a carefully constructed narrative designed more for social control than spiritual liberation. But the texts themselves whisper a different message. You are more than you've been told. The divine isn't distant, it's within you. The kingdom isn't coming, someday it's already here, hidden in plain sight. And the key to unlocking it isn't faith in someone else's authority, but awakening to your true nature. This is where our journey begins, at the intersection of archaeology and awakening, where ancient secrets challenge modern certainties, and where the question isn't whether these texts are true, but whether you're ready to hear what they have to say. The universe as cosmic mistake when divine wisdom created imperfection. The traditional story we've all heard goes something like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, looked upon his work, and declared it good. Humanity was the crown of creation, placed in paradise until sin entered the world. Simple, clean, comforting. Now, let me share what the Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi. Reveal and prepare yourself, because it's nothing like that familiar narrative. According to these ancient manuscripts, the physical universe wasn't born from divine love or perfection. Instead, it emerged from a cosmic era, tragic mistake made by a divine being named Sophia, whose name literally means wisdom. Sophia was one of the eons, spiritual emanations flowing from the ultimate, unknowable source of all existence. This supreme reality, sometimes called the Invisible Father, dwells in the pleroma realm of absolute wholeness, light, and harmony beyond anything our limited minds can comprehend. Everything in the pleroma exists in perfect unity, Eden reflecting an aspect of the divine fullness. But Sophia, driven by an intense desire to know the unknowable and create independently, acted without the consent or partnership of the Supreme Being. What emerged from her solitary attempt at creation was deeply flawed at being both ignorant and arrogant, who would come to be known as the Demiurge. The Demiurge represents one of Gnosticism's most shocking concepts. This entity, malformed and limited, had no awareness of the pleroma or the true divine reality above him. In his ignorance, he believed himself to be the only God, the supreme creator, and from this place of delusion, he shaped the material universe. Think about the implications here. The world you see around you, the mountains, oceans, cities, your physical body according to Gnostic cosmology. This entire realm wasn't crafted by infinite wisdom and love. It was constructed by a limited, deluded being who genuinely thought he was doing something magnificent. The Gnostic texts describe the Demiurge as the god portrayed in the Hebrew Bible, the deity who creates the world in 7 days, who demands worship, who punishes disobedience, who declares, "I am the Lord, and there is no other." The Gnostics saw this not as the ultimate truth, but as the boastful proclamation of an entity unaware of realities beyond his own limited perception. Working alongside the Demiurge were the Archon's lesser spiritual forces that serve as rulers and gatekeepers of the material realm. These beings, neither fully evil nor good, function as cosmic jailers. Their purpose, to maintain the illusion, to keep divine souls distracted by physical pleasures and pains, to prevent humanity from remembering its true spiritual origin. Here's where the story gets even more intriguing. When the Demiurge and his archons fashioned the first humans from matter, they created empty vessels' bodies without consciousness or life. They molded clay but couldn't animate it. Only when a spark of the divine, originating from the pleroma itself, was breathed into these forms did humanity awaken. This means, according to Gnostic understanding, that every human being is a paradox, a hybrid of two completely different natures. Your physical body, with all its needs and vulnerabilities, belongs to the Demiurge's creation, but your true essence, that innermost core of awareness and being, is a fragment of the divine pleroma. Temporarily imprisoned in flesh, you are spirit trapped in matter, light enclosed in darkness, divinity forgotten within ignorance. The Gnostic interpretation of the Garden of Eden story flips traditional theology on its head. Remember the serpent who tempted Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge? In mainstream Christianity, this serpent represents Satan, the source of humanity's fall into sin. But the Gnostics saw it completely differently. To them, the serpent was actually a liberado, bringer of Gnosis. When it offered Eve the fruit of knowledge, it wasn't leading humanity into sin. It was providing the first glimpse of awakening, the first crack in the prison walls of ignorance. The Demiurge, wanting to keep humans blind and obedient, had forbidden the tree of knowledge. "Don't eat from this tree," he commanded, because knowledge would reveal his deception. It would show humans that they weren't merely created beings meant to worship and obey, but divine souls capable of transcending the material prison altogether. So, when Eve bit into that fruit, she wasn't committing humanity's original sin. She was taking humanity's first step toward freedom. The so-called fall was actually an awakening in disguise. Sophia's role in all this adds layers of complexity and hope. Yes, she made the mistake that led to the Demiurge's creation, and, by extension, the flawed material universe. But she didn't abandon her wayward offspring, or the souls trapped in his creation. Instead, Sophia works as a mediator, a guide helping those divine sparks remember their true home. She whispers through intuition, through moments of sudden clarity, through the inexplicable longing you sometimes feel for something beyond this world. She's the force behind every genuine spiritual seeking. Every moment when you sense there must be more to existence than what meets the eye. The Gnostic cosmos, then, isn't a battlefield between absolute good and absolute evil. It's more nuanced, a layered reality, where ignorance masquerades as ultimate truth, where the creator of this world genuinely believes he's supreme, where matter imprisons spirit not through malice, but through delusion. Evil, in this framework, isn't a conscious force dedicated to destruction. It's the condition of being asleep, of forgetting your divine nature, of mistaking the shadow for reality. Suffering exists not because God is testing you or punishing you, but because divine consciousness has become trapped in a realm designed by limited awareness. This cosmology raises profound questions that still resonate today. If the material world is inherently flawed, what does that mean for how we live? If knowledge rather than faith is the key to liberation, what knowledge exactly do we need? And if a divine spark truly exists within each person, why do so few seem to awaken to it? The Gnostic answer is both simple and challenging. The Demiurge and his archons work tirelessly to keep you distracted. They use pleasure and pain, success and failure, opium and fear, anything to keep your attention focused outward on the material world rather than inward toward your true nature. Your job, should you choose to accept it, is to see through the illusion, to recognize that the reality presented to you as solid and ultimate is actually temporary and limited, to remember that you are not your body, not your thoughts, not your circumstances, but something infinitely more vast and luminous. The creation story told in the Nag Hammadi texts is meant to make you despair about the world. Rather, it is meant to awaken you to a liberating truth. This imperfect reality is on your true home. You are spirit temporarily wearing flesh, divinity temporarily experiencing limitation, light temporarily surrounded by shadow, And the way back to the Pleroma, the way home, begins with a single revolutionary act, questioning everything you've had been told about who you are and why you're here. Jesus and the hidden teachings, the master who offered keys, not chains, for 2,000 years. The image of Jesus has been carefully shaped by institutional Christianity, the divine Son of God, born of a virgin, performing miracles, dying for humanity's sins, rising from the dead. This Jesus demands faith, offers salvation through belief, and establishes a church as the sole gateway to eternal life. But what if there was another Jesus? A Jesus who spoke in riddles and paradoxes, who revealed secret wisdom to those ready to hear it, who pointed not toward heaven above, but toward the kingdom within. This is the Jesus we encounter in the Nag Hammadi texts, particularly in the stunning Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas contains no birth narratives, no miracles, no crucifixion, no resurrection. Instead, it presents 114 sayings, cryptic, challenging, mystical declarations attributed to Jesus. The text opens with a provocative claim. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. Secret sayings, not public sermons, not universal proclamations, but hidden wisdom reserved for those capable of understanding. One of the most powerful statements in this gospel cuts straight to the heart of Gnostic spirituality. Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Read that again slowly. Salvation doesn't come from believing the right doctrines or performing the correct rituals. It comes from discovering and expressing your innermost divine nature. And damnation is unipa, divine punishment. It is about the self-destruction that occurs when you deny your true essence. This teaching places enormous responsibility on the individual. You cannot outsource your spiritual liberation to a priest, a church, or even a savior. The work must be done within yourself, by yourself, for yourself. In another saying, Jesus declares, "The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty." Notice the radical emphasis on self. The kingdom of God isn't a future event or a distant location. It's a present reality, simultaneously internal and external, waiting to be recognized by those who awaken to their true identity. The poverty Jesus mentions isn't material lack, it's spiritual ignorance. To live without knowing your divine nature is to exist in the deepest form of deprivation, regardless of how much wealth or power you accumulate in the material world. These teachings bear striking similarities to the wisdom of the Essenes. That mystical Jewish sect whose writings were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Essenes lived in desert communities near Qumran, rejecting the corruption of mainstream religious authorities, practicing communal living, ritual purification, and deep scriptural study. They spoke of two spirits, one of light and one of darkness, battling for control of the human heart. They awaited the Messiah as a priestly one to restore true worship, and a kingly one to liberate Israel. Their emphasis on inner purity, direct communion with the divine, and resistance to corrupt religious establishments mirrors much of what Jesus taught. Could Jesus have had contact with the Essenes? The question fascinates scholars. The Gospels are silent about Jesus' life between ages 12 and 30th, so-called lost years. Where was he during this crucial period of development? What shaped his radical theology and spiritual depth? Some researchers suggest Jesus may have spent time with Essene communities, absorbing their mystical practices, their critical stance toward temple authorities, and their emphasis on inner transformation. John the Baptist, who baptized Jesus, certainly seems connected to Essene traditions, living in the wilderness, practicing ritual washing, preaching repentance, and the coming kingdom. The Essenes had a central figure they called the teacher of righteousness, a spiritual leader, persecuted by corrupt priests, possibly martyred for his faithfulness to divine truth. The parallels to Jesus are striking. Could this teacher have been a prototype, An earlier iteration of the enlightened master archetype that Jesus would fully embody? What makes the Nag Hammadi portrayal of Jesus so different from Orthodox Christianity is the absence of substitutionary atonement, the idea that Jesus had to die as a sacrifice to appease an angry God. Instead, Jesus functions as a revealer of hidden knowledge, a spiritual guide who shows the path rather than walking it for you. In the Gospel of Thomas, when the disciples ask Jesus about fasting, prayer, charity, and dietary laws, he responds cryptically, pointing them away from external religious observances toward inner understanding. At one point he says, "Do not tell lies, and do not do what you hate, for all things are plain in the sight of heaven." This teaching emphasizes authenticity and internal alignment over ritual compliance. What matters isn't following rules, but living truthfully, acting from your deepest integrity rather than from fear or obligation. Perhaps most radical is Jesus' teaching on unity and transcendence. He says, "When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, then will you enter the kingdom?" This cryptic saying speaks to the Gnostic goal of transcending all dualities, spirit and matter, inner and outer, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth. True awakening dissolves these false separations, revealing the fundamental unity underlying apparent division. Why was the Gospel of Thomas excluded from the biblical canon? The answer becomes clear when you consider the threat it posed to institutional authority. A text teaching that salvation comes through self-knowledge rather than church membership, that the kingdom is already present rather than requiring priestly mediation, that Jesus came to reveal rather than to redeem. Such a gospel empowers individuals and diminishes ecclesiastical control. The early church fathers, establishing orthodoxy and consolidating power, needed a Jesus who founded their institution, who made salvation dependent on correct belief and ritual participation, who established a hierarchy of authority descending from apostles to bishops to priests. They couldn't afford a Jesus who said, "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up a stone, and you will find me there," suggesting that the divine presence permeates all reality, accessible to anyone, anywhere, without institutional mediation. So the Gospel of Thomas and similar texts were branded heretical, their followers persecuted, their teachings suppressed. But the manuscripts survived, buried in the Egyptian desert, waiting for a farmer's shovel to bring them back into the light. And now they ask us uncomfortable questions. What if the Jesus we've been taught about is a carefully edited version? What if his most radical teachings were deliberately removed? What if the path he offered was about awakening consciousness rather than achieving salvation through belief? The Gnostic Jesus doesn't promise to save you from divine wrath. He offers you keys to unlock the prison of ignorance. He doesn't ask you to worship him. He invites you to become like him, awakened, liberated, fully conscious of your divine nature. This Jesus whispers across the centuries. The kingdom is within you. Know yourself, bring forth what is inside you. Transcend the illusions. Remember who you truly are. The question is, are you ready to listen? The suppression and the silence. Why truth was buried for 16 centuries. Imagine possessing documents that could fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of spirituality, creation, and our relationship with the divine. Now imagine deliberately keeping those documents locked away from the world for decades. This is una fictionade. That's exactly what happened with both the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi manuscripts. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, excitement rippled through the academic and religious communities. Here was tangible evidence of Jewish spiritual life during the time of Jesus, including the oldest known biblical manuscripts. Surely these treasures would be immediately shared with the world, translated, studied, and celebrated. Instead, something peculiar happened. A small, exclusive team of scholars, many with close ties to the Catholic Church, gained control over the scrolls. For more than 40 years, access remained severely restricted. Other researchers, regardless of their credentials, were denied permission to examine or publish findings about these ancient texts. The official explanation: the scrolls were too fragmented, too delicate, requiring painstaking restoration and careful translation. A reasonable enough justification on the surface, but critics smelled something more troubling: deliberate concealment. They argued that certain scrolls contained information threatening to core Christian doctrines, revelations about the diversity of Judaism before Christianity, about practices and beliefs that predated Jesus, about the human rather than divine origins of many supposedly unique Christian innovations. The controlled release of information allowed those in power to shape the narrative, to determine which findings received emphasis and which were downplayed or contextualized in ways that minimized their disruptive potential. It wasn't until the late 1980s and early 1990s, when pressure from independent scholars intensified and new photographic technologies emerged, that the stranglehold finally broke. In 1991, the scrolls became publicly accessible. But for decades had passed, for decades during which humanity was kept from knowledge that rightfully belonged to everyone. The pattern repeated with the Nag Hammadi manuscripts. After their discovery in 1945, these Gnostic texts similarly fell under restricted access. The same justifications emerged: complex translation challenges, the need for expert analysis, concerns about proper preservation. Yet, when these manuscripts finally reached a broader audience, what became clear was how revolutionary their content truly was. They didn't just offer alternative perspectives, they demolished the carefully constructed narrative that Christianity emerged as a unified, divinely inspired movement with clear doctrines from the beginning. Instead, the texts revealed a landscape of competing Christianities, diverse interpretations of Jesus' message, multiple understandings of salvation, creation, and the divine. They showed that many elements considered uniquely Christian baptismal rites, communal sacred meals, anticipation of a Messiah, cosmic dualism between light and darkness, had existed in Jewish mystical communities long before Jesus walked the earth. This discovery weakened the claim of unprecedented divine revelation. It suggested that Christianity, far from being a completely novel message from heaven, emerged from an existing spiritual ecosystem, synthesizing, adapting, and eventually institutionalizing ideas that had been circulating for generations. Perhaps even more threatening was what these texts revealed about the nature of spiritual authority. The Gnostics described direct, personal encounters with the divine. They spoke of inner knowledge available to anyone willing to look within. They portrayed spiritual masters not as intermediaries between God and humanity, but as guides helping others discover their inherent divine nature. This vision posed an existential threat to an institution built on hierarchical authority, where salvation flowed through official channels from God to Christ, to apostles, to bishops, to priests, to lay people. If individuals could access divine truth directly, what need was there for elaborate ecclesiastical structures? The fear wasn't merely theological, it was political and economic. For centuries, the church had wielded enormous power, crowning kings, launching crusades, accumulating vast wealth, and shaping entire civilizations. This power rested on a foundation of exclusive spiritual authority. Challenge that foundation, and the entire edifice becomes unstable. Consider the doctrine of original sin. Central to traditional Christian theology, humanity is born corrupted, inheriting Adam's guilt, requiring salvation from an external source. This teaching creates dependencies you cannot save yourself. You need the church's sacraments, rituals, and mediation. But the Book of Enoch, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls and revered by early communities, offers a different explanation for evil's origin. It describes the Watcher's angels who descended to earth, mated with human women, and taught forbidden knowledge. Evil entered the world through this angelic rebellion, not through human disobedience. If evil's source is external rather than inherent to human nature, the entire theological justification for salvation through Christ's sacrifice begins to crumble. Why do we need redemption from inherited guilt if we never bore that guilt in the first place? The Gnostic texts push even further, suggesting that ignorance, not sin, is humanity's fundamental problem. We don't need forgiveness, we need awakening. We don't require sacrifice, we need knowledge. The solution isn't external salvation, but internal illumination. These weren't just academic distinctions. They represented fundamentally different visions of human nature, divine relationship, and the path to spiritual fulfillment. And the church, having built its entire structure on one particular vision, couldn't afford to let alternatives flourish. So, suppression became strategy. Texts were branded heretical. Followers were persecuted. Libraries were burned, communities were destroyed, and over centuries, the rich diversity of early spiritual seeking was gradually reduced to a single authorized narrative. The silence surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi manuscripts, after their discovery was unaccidental, it was the continuation of a centuries-old pattern. Keep people from knowledge that might liberate them. Control the flow of information. Shape the narrative to protect institutional power. Even after these texts became publicly available, most people remain unaware of their existence or significance. They're not taught in Sunday schools. They're not discussed from pulpits. They remain confined largely to academic circles, safely distanced from the everyday believers who might find in them something transformative. This ongoing silence speaks volumes. If these texts were merely irrelevant curiosities from fringe groups, why not openly discuss them? Why not confidently demonstrate how they confirm, rather than challenge orthodox teaching? The fact that religious authorities prefer to ignore rather than engage these manuscripts suggests their contents remain uncomfortable, still capable of raising questions that have no easy answers within traditional frameworks. What emerges from this pattern of suppression is a troubling realization. The spiritual narrative we've inherited may be less about truth and more about control. The version of Christianity that survived and dominated wasn't necessarily the most authentic. It was simply the one with the most political power, the one willing to silence alternatives, the one that best served the interests of empire and institution. The real tragedy isn't that these texts were hidden for centuries, it's that even now, when they're available, so few people know about them. The suppression has evolved from active persecution to passive neglect, from burning books to simply not mentioning they exist. But here's what can't be suppressed any longer: the questions these texts raise, the alternatives they present, the possibilities they reveal. Once you know that other paths existed, other interpretations, other ways of understanding the divine and the human relationship to it, you can never quite see the official narrative the same way again. The silence was meant to protect certainty. Instead, it created a void that's now filling with curiosity, with questions, with seekers ready to explore what was taken from them. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all, not the texts themselves, but the awakening they inspire in those who encounter them. Awakening to your divine nature. The ancient wisdom speaking to modern souls. We live in strange times, don't we? Surrounded by more information than any generation in history, yet feeling somehow disconnected from real truth. We have access to infinite content, yet struggle to find genuine meaning. We're more connected digitally than ever before, yet increasingly isolated spiritually. Into this paradox, the Nag Hammadi manuscripts and Dead Sea Scrolls speak with unexpected relevance. These aren't just archaeological artifacts gathering dust in museums, they're mirrors reflecting questions we're still asking, struggles we're still facing, yearnings we're still feeling. The core Gnostic message resonates powerfully today. You are not who they told you to be. The reality surrounding you is not what it appears, and liberation comes not from external sources, but from awakening to truth that already lives within you. Sound familiar? It should. We're living through a collective questioning of inherited narratives. People are leaving traditional religions in unprecedented numbers, not because they've lost interest in spirituality, but because they're searching for something more authentic, more experiential, more personally meaningful. The Gnostic emphasis on direct knowledge rather than mediated belief speaks directly to this hunger. You don't need a priest to interpret scripture for you. You don't need an institution to validate your spiritual experiences. You don't need permission from authority figures to explore the mysteries of existence. The kingdom is within you. Always has been. Always will be. These teachings, so central to the texts found at Nag Hammadi, aligns perfectly with contemporary practices gaining popularity worldwide. Mindfulness, contemplation, breath work, psychedelic exploration. All of these point toward the same destination: direct encounter with consciousness itself, unmediated experience of what lies beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. The Gnostic warning about the material world as a prison of distraction feels especially prescient in our age of relentless stimulation. The archons are those cosmic forces, keeping souls trapped in ignorance, find their modern equivalents in algorithms designed to capture attention, in consumer cultures manufacturing endless desire, in media environments flooding us with noise and controversy. We're distracted from our depths by designed superficiality. We're kept from self-knowledge by carefully engineered external focus. We're imprisoned not by visible chains, but by invisible manipulation of what we pay attention to. The Gnostics would recognize this immediately. The mechanisms have updated, but the underlying dynamic remains unchanged to keep people focused outward, on the material, on the temporary, and they'll never turn inward to discover their eternal nature. But here's the beautiful thing. Awareness itself is the key. The moment you recognize the prison, you've already begun escaping it. The instant you question the narrative, you've stepped outside its control. Simply knowing that reality might be more than what you've been told opens doorways that were previously invisible. This is Gnosis in action, not accumulating more information, but experiencing a fundamental shift in how you perceive reality itself. It's the difference between reading about water and actually drinking it, between studying maps and taking the journey, between believing in light and becoming luminous. The psychological insights in these ancient texts astound modern readers. Carl Jung, one of the 20th century's most influential psychologists, found in Gnostic symbolism profound truths about the human psyche. He saw in their myths and metaphors sophisticated understandings of consciousness, shadow, integration, and what he called individuation. The process of becoming your authentic self. The Gnostic journey from ignorance to knowledge, from fragmentation to wholeness, from identification with the material to recognition of the spiritual, mirrors the psychological work of integrating unconscious contents and awakening to fuller consciousness. We can also see Gnostic themes rippling through contemporary culture. Films like The Matrix aren't subtle about their influence. The entire premise mirrors Gnostic cosmology. Humanity lives in a simulated reality, kept docile and productive, unaware of the truth. A small group of awakened individuals seeks to free others. Liberation comes through seeing beyond the illusion. The Truman Show explores similar territory, a man discovering that his entire world is artificial, carefully constructed to keep him contained, monitored by unseen controllers. His escape requires questioning everything, trusting his inner sense that something is wrong despite all evidence to the contrary. These narratives resonate because they tap into something we intuitively feel. That consensus reality might be a construction, that we're capable of perceiving more than we currently do. That awakening is possible but requires courage to challenge what everyone else accepts as normal. The Gnostic vision, far from being outdated mysticism, offers a framework for understanding our contemporary crisis of meaning. It suggested the emptiness so many feel isn't a personal failing but a natural response to living inauthentically, disconnected from our divine essence, mistaking shadows for substance. What would it mean to take these teachings seriously in your life? Not as religious dogma to believe, but as experimental hypotheses to test through lived experience. It would mean cultivating practices that quiet external noise and create space for inner listening, meditation, contemplative prayer, time in night, silence, solitude. These aren't escapes from reality, they're gateways to deeper reality. It would mean questioning inherited beliefs without guilt, examining assumptions you've never thought to examine, asking whether the stories you've been told about God, about yourself, about the purpose of existence, actually align with your deepest intuitions and experiences. It would mean recognizing that your body, while temporary, houses something eternal, that your thoughts and emotions, while real, don't define your essential nature, that beneath the surface of your conditioned personality exists an unconditioned awareness, a divine spark, a fragment of infinite consciousness, experiencing itself through your unique perspective. The Gnostics called this awakening. Others call it enlightenment, liberation, self-realization, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature. The labels matter less than the recognition. You are more than you appear. You contain depths you've barely explored. You possess capacities for awareness, compassion, creativity, and connection that far exceed what your conditioning has led you to believe possible. And here's the radical part: you don't need anyone's permission to explore this. No institution can grant or withhold access to your innermost being. No authority can validate or invalidate your direct experience of the divine. You are already complete, already whole, already connected to the source of all existence. The journey isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about remembering what you've always been. The Nag Hammadi manuscripts and Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden for so long and now recovered, offer us a gift. They remind us that the spiritual path has always included seekers who looked within, who questioned external authority, who trusted direct experience over inherited doctrine. These ancient voices whisper across the centuries. You are not separate from the divine. The kingdom is already present. The truth is already within you. Wake up. Remember. Come home. In a world that constantly tells you to look outside yourself for validation, salvation, and meaning, this message is revolutionary. In an era of spiritual consumerism and commodified enlightenment, the simple practice of turning inward with honest inquiry becomes an act of resistance. The texts that were suppressed because they threatened institutional power now threaten something else. The personal prisons we've built from unexamined beliefs, inherited fears, and culturally conditioned limitations. Are you ready to question those walls? To test whether they're as solid as they appear? To discover what lies beyond the boundaries you've accepted without choosing them? The ancient Gnostics faced persecution for their beliefs. Today, the challenge is different, but no less real. We face distraction, overwhelm, and the subtle pressure to remain comfortable in familiar ignorance rather than risk the discomfort of genuine awakening. But the invitation remains open. The divine spark within you hasn't dimmed despite centuries of suppression, despite cultural conditioning, despite all the forces that would keep you asleep. It's still there, waiting, patient, eternal, ready to illuminate your consciousness the moment you turn your attention toward it. The secrets hidden in the desert sands for 16 centuries have returned, not to create a new religion, but to remind us of an ancient truth. The light you seek is not in temples, or texted as in you. It always has been. The only question is, will you finally look? So, friends, we've journeyed together through hidden caves and suppressed wisdom, through cosmic mysteries and inner kingdoms. Now, I want to hear from you. What resonated most deeply with you from these ancient teachings? Has anything you learned today shifted how you see spirituality, reality, or your place in the universe? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a community of awakened seekers supporting each other on this journey. And listen, if this video opened your eyes to truths you'd never encountered before, do me a favor, subscribe to our channel, The Lost Gospels of Jesus, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our explorations into hidden wisdom and spiritual awakening. Give this video a thumbs up if it challenged you, inspired you, or simply made you think differently. Share it with friends and family who might be ready to question what they've been told and discover what has been hidden from them. The journey doesn't end here. We're just getting started, peeling back the layers of suppressed knowledge and reclaiming the spiritual wisdom that belongs to all of us. See you in the next video, where we'll dive even deeper into the mysteries that await those brave enough to seek truth.